The Eurocentric analysis of the Arab states has failed to recognize that most of the Arab countries and their borders are closely based on long pre-colonial historical precedents, including the naming of states. In the case of Palestine, as in the case of most other Arab political entities, traditionally and throughout the Middle Ages, the name Philistine had indicated both an exact geographic location and the identity of the predominantly, but not exclusively, Arab Muslim population. Moreover, the history of modern Palestine is often studied from and with European, Ottoman, and Zionist settler perspectives. The autonomous agency and voice of Palestine and the Palestinians themselves are seldom recognized. Arabic toponyms such as Palestine or Palestine, Egypt, Syria, Libya, Iraq, or the Yemen all have deep and ancient historical roots and indigenous legitimacy of self-definition. Start here 10. The Ottoman Empire. You know those lists that you'll see online sometimes? They're a copy-pasted timeline that's supposed to drum up some image of a long-standing rivalry between Arabs, Muslims, Jews, whatever. If you know even a little bit about the history, those lists are, well, I don't want to say laughable because it's still warfare, but in context, they do feel pretty absurd. To say nothing of obviously in bad faith. Like just for example, the Ottomans conquered Palestine in 1516. The violence lasted for several years later because the transition was not clean, and those lists will almost always include 1517 massacres that were supposedly targeting a Jewish community, but like everything else, they were just in the context of larger fighting and generally about transition of power, land, and taxes. So in order to try and paint this history as if it was some long-running feud between the two religions, they will exaggerate how much violence was done, like in 1660 in the context of the Druze revolt, or they're guilty of profound lie of omission. Like one of my favorite stories of Muslim-Jewish brotherhood is when the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Bayezid II, created a safe haven for Jewish people who were fleeing the Inquisition in Spain. Bayezid II sent out the Ottoman Navy under the command of Admiral Kemal Reis to Spain in 1492 in order to evacuate them safely to Ottoman lands. He granted the refugees the permission to settle in the Ottoman Empire and become citizens. He ridiculed the conduct of Ferdinand II and Isabel I in expelling a class of people so useful to their subjects. Quote, "You venture to call Ferdinand a wise ruler, he who has impoverished his own country and enriched mine." Again, it's not perfect. It was a wave of various good and bad. The dhimmi system gave way to the millet system and so on. But essentially, for about 300 years, nobody really talks about Ottoman Palestine because things were basically fine. There weren't any huge major upheavals. Everybody lived in relative harmony. They lived in local polities that generally had some amount of autonomy within the empire. It was pretty chill. The same unfortunately could not be said for Imperial Europe, which was well on their way to inventing a pseudoscientific concept of race in order to systematize the justifications for their absolute reign of terror across the planet in the name of manifest destiny and greed. There, the rise of anti-Semitism/Judeophobia against Ashkenazi Jews in Europe did not waver. It began a steady incline upwards. Basically, following the 1500s more or less, Jewish communities in both Europe and Russia became one of the most common scapegoats for anything bad that happens. For example, they were blamed for the Black Plague. This came alongside a growing racist mythology of anti-Semitic tropes such as being greedy and blood libel and all of those things. This trend in Europe and Russia showed no sign of slowing by the early 1800s, while simultaneously the Ottoman Empire was busy going broke. This, of course, happened for myriad reasons, but essentially you can boil it down to the Ottoman Empire, various dynasties, realizing they had fallen behind Europe in terms of military might and wealth, trying to scramble to implement rushed policies of reform and modernization, which unfortunately for the average person resulted in exorbitantly high fees and taxation. Fun fact, that's actually why my Syrian family was no longer Nizari. The Aga Khan asked them for so much money, they were like, hell with you, we're converting. These unfair tax policies culminated in the Peasants' Revolt of 1834, which, as you can see, is also included on those lists, because in times of war and battle, Civil society breaks down and people attack each other. You could also put Christian communities and Druze communities and so on this same list. That's history. It's ugly. But what it does not do is paint a picture of some long-standing rivalry and persecution of Arabs and Muslims against Jewish communities. In the aftermath of that revolt, the Ottoman Empire implemented a wave of modernization reforms known as the Tanzimat, among many other things, the purpose of which was to try and increase their revenue via sweeping land rights reform, including privatization, registration, and tax reform. And it was in the context of all these things that the first European Jewish settler colony was established in the beautiful historical land of Palestine by one Sir Moses Montefiore. Which brings us to the so-called early pioneers of Zionism. This was Start Here. I'm Paul Nabil, Syrian American. Next up, World War I.